The French Chef is made possible by a grant from the Polaroid Corporation.
You've probably done the French jelly roll, but have you ever tried the orange almond twist? We're doing the French jelly roll with a twist today on the French Chef. Welcome to the French Chef. I'm Julia Child. This is a French jelly roll, and it looks like a rather fancy edifice, but all it is a great big sponge cake baked on a long platter and then rolled up with a filling. And in France it's called a biscuit roulé, and in English it's called either a sponge cake or a jelly roll cake. And we've done lots of sponge cakes before, and they can be of many different kinds of flavors, but it's all exactly the same technique. And so this is really a demonstration in themes and variations. And whenever you're going to make a cake like this, you or any cake recipe, first you read your recipe. Some people never read a recipe, and then they come into the middle of it and say, oh gosh, I haven't got the right kind of a pan. So read the recipe first and then preheat your oven. This is to be preheated to 375 degrees, and then set your oven rack. This has got to be a rack in the middle. And then, after you've taken care of those preliminaries, you then want to assemble and measure out all your ingredients. And I have all of mine down on a card, so I won't forget what they are. Preheat the oven. Then the next thing you do is to prepare your pan. And I've got to go way back over here to get the pan because I didn't look at my recipe beforehand. And in this recipe, you want to butter the cake pan. I've got to have some melted butter anyway for the rest of the recipe, so it's very easy to butter the pan if I have melted butter and a pastry brush. And then we also have to line it with wax paper. This is also that this great jelly roll won't stick to the pan once it gets baked. And then take a sheet of wax paper and lay it in the pan. I'm using here a regular jelly roll pan, which is 11 by 18 inches. And I didn't measure my oven before I got it. I found that it had some little edges here that stuck out like that, and when I tried to put it in the oven, it wouldn't go. So my husband bent them down, and now it fits in the oven. So in other words, measure your oven before you buy your pan. And now the wax paper gets buttered. I've sometimes used other things than butter for greasing a pan, and they don't taste very well, so I haven't used them since. And I think whenever you're going to make something like this, you want to use the best. Now we want to flour the pan, so here's just about a quarter of a cup of flour. And then you want to turn the pan all around, and then you're going to knock it out in the sink. But you want to make sure that you get the flour all over every part of the pan. And if you find that that the flour hasn't adhered somewhere, then you put on a little more butter and flour. Now you've got the flour in, so you knock it out. Whack. And then the pan is now all ready. And so we now get to our ingredients. And we have to have 3/4 of a cup of sifted cake flour. And now whenever you're doing a cake recipe, you can't have any by guess and by gum or something's going to happen. So be sure that you really measure accurately. Have measuring spoons and the right kind of cups. And in this, we're going to have 3/4 of a cup of sifted cake flour. And this is to be measured exactly like this for this recipe. Now, the flour measurement is very important. So we want 3/4 of a cup. So lay your cup on a piece of wax paper and then sift directly into the cup until the cup is overflowing. And then sweep off the excess flour. And be sure you're very careful on measuring this way. Every cookbook or recipe has or at least they should tell you exactly how they measure their flour so you get exactly the right amount. So there's our, I didn't quite get that all. There's our flour. And this is plain, ordinary, regular bleached cake flour that comes in a package. So there's our flour measured. And now we have, let's see, next we have the grated rind of an orange. This is going to be a sponge cake with an orange almond twist to it. So we just grate the peel right into a mixing bowl. And then we want a third of a cup of strained orange juice. I've got this little plastic strainer that has a sieve, which I got at my hardware store, and it's really very nice because then you don't have to have an extra strainer. That'll be about 1½ oranges. And then I'll measure it exactly into my cup. And there's my cup. See which the 1/3, and there's the 1/3 mark right there. And there's exactly 1/3 cup of orange juice, and then we have 3 eggs. And these are U.S. graded large eggs. Very often if you make a recipe and you find that you may have used jumbo eggs and then it doesn't fit your pan because they're too big. So we're going to break the whites into our egg white bowl and the yolks into our beating bowl. And you want to be very, very careful indeed when you're breaking your eggs, because we're going to beat these egg whites stiff. And you want to have an absolutely clean bowl that has absolutely no grease in it, and it's not damp or wet in any way, or it has no egg yolks in it. Because if you have egg yolk grease or dampness, your egg whites may not melt. And you may find that if you aren't used to breaking eggs, that it's a little safer to break them into a little jar like that first. Because it would be terrible if you're going to have 16 egg whites and then you broke 1 egg yolk and you had to throw all the egg whites away. So if you break them in each one in a little jar and then into your bowl, you won't run into any trouble. And then we're going to beat these by machine this time. And then we're going to have some almonds, because this is an orange almond cake. And you can buy, these are going to be powdered or pulverized almonds that look like that. Those are blanched pulverized almonds. And you can buy them in a little sack like this. These are put up in California, and you can ask your grocer to get them for you, and it's very convenient. But if you can't find them, you can use regular blanched almonds like this and do them in the electric blender. You can either use them in the large jar at fast heat, or some blenders come with a little tiny jar like that, and you just put some almonds in and then put the cover on and let her go. You can go fast or as fast as you want on that. And then there you are, and that'll be, if I can get this cover off, it'll be powdered almonds just the same way. See, they look just like that. So, however way you do it, you want 3/4 of a cup of blanched powdered almonds. And now we are all ready to go. We have to have sugar, which is somewhere. Here it is, right in front of me. And we're going to have some almond extract, and we need some cream of tartar. So in other words, everything is ready to go, so you can start mixing your cake. And I'll start out with the egg whites. And the reason that you want to have everything ready to go is as soon as you start blending your batter, you want to go whish through it and into the oven, because with a cake you don't want it to wait. So we'll start our egg whites, and I'll mention the ingredients as we go along, so in case you want to write them down again. So that's 3 egg whites. We want that to go at a moderate speed for a moment until the egg whites are broken up. And then we want a sort of a large pinch of cream of tartar. And that's what you always put in with egg whites, because it keeps the egg whites from collapsing after they're beating. I'm going to let that go quite slowly, and then I'm going to start blending the batter. And we have 3 egg yolks and the grated rind of an orange. And also to keep the pan steady, I'm having a wet pot holder. And then I'm going to set my beating bowl in a big pan, and then I can beat with one hand. And this is going to have 2/3 cup of granulated sugar, gradually beaten in. You see, we've done this a lot before. And you always beat it in gradually, because the egg yolks might turn granular if you beat it in all at once. Now, as I said, the object of this recipe is when you see it, you can say, oh heavens, I've done that before. I hardly even need to look at it. And when you feel that way, it shows that you've really just about begun to master the art of cookery, because it all turns out to be about the same old thing, but with a few other flavorings. Now, there are 2/3 cup of sugar beaten into the egg yolks, so we have 1/3 cup of strained orange juice, and that goes right in. And then in go our 3/4 cup of blanched pulverized almonds, and that just gets beaten in. And then we want to have 1/4 teaspoon of almond extract. You always need a little extract when you use the almonds to bring out the flavor. Then we have our 3/4 cup of sifted cake flour, and that just goes right in. Because this is a sort of a moist batter, you don't have to bother about folding it in. That's one way that this orange almond sponge cake differs from most of the others, because you have no trouble with the folding in of your flour. So, now we'll take a look at the egg whites. They've got to be beaten to stiff peaks. Let's see how they are. And then also, to make them hold a little more, you can beat in a little bit of granulated sugar, a tablespoon. Now that looks like stiff peaks, but I want you to see exactly how they are. You see, that stands in a little peak in the spoon, so that means it's ready to fold. So, we'll need our big, when you get a wire whip, be sure that you get a nice big one like that, because if you have a little tiny one, it takes so long to do anything. And so now, this is a fairly thin batter, so there isn't any need of stirring the egg whites in a little bit to lighten the batter. You can just put the egg whites right on top and start folding in. And you remember this folding technique of using your rubber spatula, coming down in the middle to the side of the bowl, turning the spatula and up. And as you see, that brings a little bit of that lower mixture up over the egg whites. And then keep turning your bowl, and just do this very rapidly. See, the whole object in folding it, it's one of the things that some people find rather difficult to do, is that you do not want to deflate the egg whites, because it's the egg whites which make the cake mount. And by doing this kind of a folding of of doing this movement and gradually bringing your heavier mixture up over the egg whites, then you're doing it so that the egg whites are not deflated. And then this also is going to have in some melted butter. You remember I told you at the beginning we had a tablespoon. I've got to go back and get my tablespoon because I'm being very careful about measurements today. We want some cool melted butter, which is, I guess I don't need this brush in here anymore. So we want a tablespoon and a half of melted butter, and that gets folded in slowly, and you be sure that you fold the butter in only at the last minute. And then we have half a tablespoon. Now this is, I'm being very accurate, so the half a tablespoon would be a teaspoon and a half. You see, if you're doing other kinds of cooking, you can just sort of throw everything in and it makes very little difference, but with a cake, we're being very accurate indeed. And now we have the butter folded in, and we're ready to put it into the pan. And that's an 18 by 11 inch pan. And there it goes. That orange peel has a lovely smell when it goes in. And you'll find with this orange, also the almond in the cake has sort of gives it a lovely texture. And you also taste the almonds, but then you also have sort of a texture quality too. There, so that's all spread in nicely. I better get off that extra little bit and then taste the batter to see how it is, and it's delicious. Now, this is all ready, so we bang the platter down a little bit. And that settles the cake. Now, as you see, that is exactly like the other sponge cake recipes that we've done. We've done a chocolate one, and they all started out exactly the same way, with egg yolks and sugar beaten together, and then the flour and the egg whites. But as you noticed, I pointed out to you in this batter, the orange juice lightened the batter so it was really quite liquid, so we could stir the flour in and then immediately fold in the egg whites. But sometimes in a recipe like the ordinary sponge cake, you will find that you have beaten your egg yolks and sugar together to make the ribbon, which we didn't even need to bother with in this time, but that makes quite a stiff mixture, so that then if you immediately fold in your flour, it makes the batter even stiffer. And then when you try and fold in your egg whites, the batter is so stiff that it really has that terrible effect of deflating the egg whites. And in that case, you'd alternate folding the egg whites and the flour. So just remember that with a sponge cake or biscuit recipe. If you find that you have a stiff batter, alternate folding in egg whites and flour. And now this is going into the oven in a 375-degree oven, and the rack is in the middle. And this is to bake for just about 10 minutes. And then when it's done, I have one that's already done, and I shall bring it over here and we'll take a look at it. It has to cool upside down so that I will sort of undo it and then do it up again, so you'll see exactly how it works. Now, with one of these sponge rolls, the terribly important thing is that you do not overcook it. It should cook just until, when you feel the top of it, it's just a little spongy when your finger presses it. And then you will also notice that it's just beginning to shrink from the sides of the pan. Of course, this one is now cooled, so it shrunk quite a bit. But you want to be very careful not to overcook a sponge sheet like this, or you'll find that it's brittle and you can't roll it. So be sure 10 minutes at 375 is usually enough. It's just the faintest color and the faintest line of shrinkage, and you can just touch it with your hand and it springs back. And then, as soon as you take it out of the oven, that's hot, you then want to sprinkle it with powdered sugar and just put that in a sieve or a cake sifter. and then just sift powdered sugar all over it. And remember, the cake is hot and just out of the oven. And then you take some more wax paper and put it over the top. And then you take a towel that's damp, wrung out, so it's just a little bit damp, and you spread that over the top of it. And then you want it to cool upside down, and I think the easiest way to cool it upside down is to take a tray and turn it upside down on that. And then you want to let it cool for 20 minutes until you feel it and it's cool to your hand. And then you're ready to fill and roll it. And with an ordinary sponge cake, you can usually roll it up in its towel and put it in the refrigerator. But I found with this orange almond sponge cake, because it's slightly more brittle, it's probably a better idea to fill it just after it's cooled. And now it's cooled for 20 minutes. And you see here's this little paper from the bottom. And you loosen that. And there is your cake. You can see why it was useful to butter the pan, because that means it's very easy to unmold. And then you peel off the paper on the bottom. You see, remember that paper was buttered and floured so that it will easily come off. So I have to loosen it all around the side. And then it just peels right off. And be sure to peel it carefully, because you don't want to tear your cake. And then, because you're going to roll this cake up with a filling, you want to trim off any little edges like that seem a little bit, see, that has slightly colored, and that might crack, and that you can eat. Very nice, too. I swallowed some powdered sugar. So you want to trim off all that edge there. And just save all of that for when you get hungry. Then I'm going to trim off this bottom, too. But don't forget this trimming part of it. There, now that's all ready, and that's now ready to fill. And for the filling, you can use a buttercream filling, or if you're going to make sort of a cake out of it, or you can use a jelly filling. And for the jelly filling, you see how quickly made this is. And if you want a really quick dessert, you just spread it with any kind of jelly or jam. And if you had some homemade preserves, that would be lovely. I've got a mixture here, which is fresh strawberries, into which I put a little bit of gelatin. I had about 3 or 4 cups of fresh strawberries, and then I used some white vermouth and some brandy, and then I mixed that, and then I dissolved the gelatin in that, and then heated it a little bit, and then mixed it with the strawberries, because you want to have a mixture that is slightly homogeneous, so that it won't sort of fall out of your cake when you roll it up. And then also, because I thought it would be nice to give an oriental touch, I put in some sliced almonds and some, what do you call them? Kumquats. Now here they are. And these are the kumquats here. So I thought a nice name for this would be Jelly Roll Cho-Cho-San, after Madame Butterfly, because if you think of almonds in the spring, almond trees blossoming in the spring in Japan, and then I guess kumquats are Far Eastern, at least they sound so. They're those little sort of oval-shaped oranges that come in a jar packed in syrup. And so now you have the filling all over the cake, and then just take the paper and just roll it up with the paper. I'll just leave it at that for a moment, and then it goes onto the dish. Now, this is this question of onto the dish. I think I get it on, I hope, with my... Some people like to put it on with a piece of wax paper underneath, but I don't like that because when you cut it, sometimes you cut with the wax paper on. And now we still have some strawberry, so we will put some of our strawberries at either end of the dish. And then we're going to cover it again with powdered sugar. This is to hide any sort of little spots and things on the cake, because having been wrapped up in paper and so forth, it would never look very nicely. And so then, to follow on with the Japanese cho-cho-san theme, we'll put on some little kumquats on the top. You always have to decorate these things with something because they look a little bit naked, and if you've made any spills on the plate, you'll just wipe it up with a spotlessly clean towel. And then there we are. And this kind of a cake you can use, say, if you're going to make a Christmas Yule log cake. You would use exactly this kind of a cake and then probably use a buttercream filling with it. But as you can see, it's quickly done, and once you have it all filled, you can put it in the refrigerator and then just put on the powdered sugar at the last moment. So here we are, all ready to eat our French jelly roll. There, we're all set up for a dessert party, and I'm going to carve you a piece so that you can see how it looks. Really, I think this is a very nice filling. What's fun to do is to make the fillings and then invent a nice name for them. I think it's better served up, and then put a little more strawberries on. And then if you like, put some whipped cream, and you can fill it with whipped cream, but not everybody likes to have a lot of cream, so I think it's better to have the cream on the side. And with this, we're having coffee, and then after that, we're having liqueur. So this makes an extremely nice kind of a dessert, I think. Or also, if you're having people in, as they often do in Norway or France, for instance, for an evening party where you would have something sweet and some liqueurs or champagne, that's very nice. So next time you want to make a French jelly roll, call it cho-cho-san after Madame Butterfly, or if you want to call it by the French name, it would be biscuit roulé Madame Butterfly. That's all for today on The French Chef. This is Julia Child. Bon appétit.
Julia Child is co-author of the book Mastering the Art of French Cooking.